I'm not saying anything. I'm just the eye candy for you guys to. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, you want me to start and then you're going to go? So I was supposed to start. I already messed up. Anyway, I just want to welcome you guys to our inaugural Socratic stage. This is the second year that we've done this, or third year. We have an amazing lineup. We have some amazing, go to our website and stay close to the website because we have an amazing lineup and some surprises that will be added throughout the year, which is just going to be fantastic. I do want to take a few seconds and thank our sponsors. This whole thing has been underwritten for years now, thanks to Ling and Michael Markovitz. Ling and Michael, if you stand up. And obviously, we have an amazing lineup for you guys tonight. When they put up the Socratics stage backdrop, you'll see there's a little barcode. Anyone who wants to scan the barcode and make a contribution to the Socratic stage, that would be wonderful. But we'd also like to thank, with us is our chair of our Board of Trustees, Deborah Jenks, and her husband, Robert Harvey, if you want to recognize. We have the chair of our foundation and an alum, both like Deborah, Jim McDonald. And then two other sponsors that we'd like to thank are creative contractors who you've probably seen at different points in time have done a lot of the beautification of the campus, and Greg Douglas. I don't know if Greg is here, but Greg Douglas from Douglas Jeep. And you might have read recently we talked about we're going to have a statue honoring free speech and civil discourse related to Charlie Kirk and the great service that he did. And literally. That idea came Saturday, almost a week ago, from Greg Douglas, who's also on our foundation board. So I just want to thank Greg for that great idea and a great tribute. And honestly, if a university can't be a marketplace of ideas in a civil discourse, then we're failing not just our students, but the country as a whole. But with that, I'm going to introduce Will Witt. Will Witt, we hired maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago, a fantastic hire. He's our director of our public policy events. He does the director of our social media. And he's a little bit of a celebrity himself. He's only 29. I joke, I'm 60. David Rancourt, who's our vice provost, is a 60-year-old man. I joke with David Rancourt all the time. This kid accomplished more than you and I at 29 than we did in 2 combined 60s. He's got 2 books he's already written. He's just been a fantastic addition to the team. And so we'll introduce our distinguished leader of our panel, Dr. Scott Atlas, who we're honored to have back. We're going to have to have like a ring of honor, and you're going to have to be the first person on it, Scott. He's come for our amazing graduation speech. He gave numerous Socratic stages, but it's an honor to have you back, Scott, and an honor to have the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Richard. That was very kind of you. None of it's true, but it's very nice of you to say so. My name is Will Witt. As I said, I'm the Director of Public Policy Events here. Along with some other people, we are helping to bring the Socratic stage to all of you. We have some fantastic events lined up for this fall that we're already starting to put together, and we appreciate all of your support. Free speech is the foundation of what a university is about, where you have ideas that clash, and maybe you disagree, but you can leave it and say, wow, I really learned something today. These ideas really challenged me. Instead of going home and pouting about it, we say the best ideas rise to the top. And that is what our Socratic Stage series is about. And if it's something that you believe in the same way that we do here at New College, again, the donation link is at the QR code if you would like to support what we are doing. We're very excited to have you here. Let me introduce Dr. Scott Atlas. Dr. Scott Atlas is a Robert Weston Senior Fellow in Health Policy at Stanford's Hoover Institution. A physician, author, and policy advisor, he has written extensively on the role of government and free enterprise in healthcare and has served as an advisor to U.S. policymakers. including as a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Atlas. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Will, and it's always great to be in Florida. I live in California, so I don't think I have to explain that. Well, I'm here to welcome everyone to the special symposium and discussion we would like to have on one of the most important topics in America today, the media. And the discussion is entitled Truth, Bias, and Power, How the Transformation of America's Media is Reshaping Society. Co-sponsored by, of course, New College of Florida and the Global Liberty Institute. I first, of course, want to thank Richard Corcoran and New College and the staff, particularly Will, for all the work that went into this, particularly the Markovitz family for supporting the Socratic stage, which is so essential and should be replicated everywhere. And of course, to my friends who are on the media panel here. They are not just my friends, though you will see they are uniquely suited to help us understand what's happening in American media today and its impact. I do want to start with a few remarks. I recently spoke in London at Jordan Peterson's ARC conference, which is an international forum that brings together people who believe in reclaiming the core virtues of Western civilization, especially freedom. And I was asked to speak on the topic, restoring institutions. So I got up on stage and I first asked, why are we even here at this particular time, awakened to the need for a total institutional overhaul? Because after all, for decades, we've been aware that institutions were failing. Incompetent, wasteful governments, agenda-driven schools and universities, and yes, editorialized, dishonest journalism. The answer was obvious to me. It was COVID, it was the pandemic that personally impacted us. And it didn't necessarily cause things, but it exposed this massive across-the-board institutional failure that finally could not be denied. To me, the most unethical breakdown of leadership in free societies in our lifetimes. The question to me is, why did free people accept the draconian, unprecedented, and illogical lockdowns? That is the question. Clearly, censorship and propaganda were key parts of that. Tools of control that convinced the public that a consensus of experts existed and that any dissenters to that were highly dangerous. Why is censorship used? To shut someone up, but that's not really the reason. It's more importantly to deceive the public, to stop others from hearing, to convince a naive public that somehow there is a, quote, consensus on truth. But truth is not a team sport. It's not determined by consensus or numbers of people who disagree or their titles. It's discovered by debate, proven by critical analysis of evidence. Arguments are won by data and logic, not by personal attack or censoring. Across the world, we've witnessed many aggressive moves away from individual freedom. This movement has been facilitated by decades of educating young people on college campuses and in K through 12 with a single biased curriculum that extols false principles counter to historical evidence. And at the same time, it is the media. Media neutrality, academic freedom, and freedom of speech have increasingly become under pressure. This has severely damaged the environment for open debate and civil discourse. The media, social as well as mainstream, has been dominated by a single viewpoint, engaging in implicit and now overt, explicit censorship, rendering it very difficult for individuals to gain an objective understanding of facts, and worse, demonizing the fellow citizens who dare to disagree. This dangerous trend threatens the free exchange of ideas that is essential to democracy and to any truth-seeking. Disruption is sorely needed, and America responded by electing the most disruptive leader in modern political history, Donald Trump. And that awakening is the silver lining, I have to convince myself, to all the bad that we have seen. Today, though, many are basking in that victory. Yes, it was an undeniable repudiation of growing centralization of power and their failures, and also social policies, many of which were contrary to simple common sense. But most importantly, it was a slap back at the media, at media propaganda, at cancel culture, a pushback against censorship. The problem is that no matter what happens in institutions, in my view, solutions come from individuals, certainly not from government, and ultimately is individuals, not institutions, who will save freedom. 2.5 years ago, therefore, I co-founded the Global Liberty Institute with my colleague Joshua Rao. We now call it the GLI Liberty Network. It's an independent international nonpartisan initiative for promoting individual and economic liberty and the free exchange of ideas. The core of GLI is the Rising Leaders Program. We are on a mission to secure the future of freedom. We empower and propel the careers of bold young leaders who stand for liberty, economic freedom, and specifically free speech. We identify and mentor young rising stars in early private and public sector careers, educating them, but more importantly, networking them among themselves so they're not alone, and directly making liaisons to senior established leaders who are committed to freedom and the free exchange of ideas. We also recognize that we in America, probably throughout the world, have a disastrous void in courage. To quote C.S. Lewis, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Therefore, in our Rising Leaders application, after the usual resume and references and accomplishments, we ask only one additional question. What have you done to show personal courage? Through this, we accelerate the careers so that these people become our next set of leaders in business, in finance, in government, and in the media. Now, I want to finish my remarks with the fact that our children, young adults in the US, are now front and center. It is not mere coincidence that Gen Z assassinated Charlie Kirk, attempted to kill President Trump, shot up schools, and murdered United Healthcare's CEO. This is a generation that stands as a profoundly damaged group. They are scarred by ideological indoctrination, social media's grip, marginalization as a society that they've lived in of the morality anchors like religion and families, and a narcissistic culture that breeds entitlement. They have an alarming psychological fragility. They are hypersensitive to what they call microaggressions. They equate words with violence. They have an obsession with censoring misinformation. And this amplifies their vulnerability to what I think is a perverse rationale for violent behavior. This was, of course, tragically illustrated by the assassination of Charlie Kirk, directly as he engaged in civil debate, which is the essence of a free, peaceful society. I like to think the solution is present in Gen Z itself. Charlie Kirk knew that. He devoted his life to fearlessly engaging Gen Z. Why did he do that? To empower them, to empower his audience to think critically about liberty, morality, and truth. We also need to rise to the occasion. We need to mentor these people. They need our help. Tonight we're here to focus on the media. Their role is probably the most important of any institution in our country. I agree with what Jefferson said once, which was that if he had a choice between a government and no newspapers, or newspapers and no government, he would choose newspapers and no government. It's that essential to a democracy and a free society. The problem is they've abrogated their duty to inform the public, but at the same time hold those in power in check, accountable for truth. And after that gross failure, we are seeing dramatic change, which we will talk about tonight. It's been decentralized. The promise of the free exchange of ideas is finally coming up with the proliferation of media outlets, with internet and with social media. It's almost to the point of a national town square. But with all its chaos and all its varying levels of credibility, we still need reliable, objective news and smart, critical analysis, which you have heard all three of these panelists do on TV many times. So I'm very anxious to hear their insights. Thank you all for attending the event. We hope you're provoked to engage in the discussion directly. Thank you. What I'd like to do now is take the opportunity to give a brief intro to all three of our panelists, and then each one will come up or sit at their seat if they want and give some opening remarks. I'll start with proximal here. Molly Hemingway is the editor-in-chief of The Federalist. She's senior journalism fellow at Hillsdale College and a Fox News contributor. We've all seen her probably on TV many times. She's the co-author or author of very important books, including Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court, and the author of Rigged, How the Media, Big Tech, and the Democrats Seized Our Elections. I want to point out something that Molly said, which is very important. She was asked why students should study journalism. And Molly said, an informed citizenry is vitally important to the health of the republic. As the journalism profession deteriorates, good reporters with an interest in truth-telling are more important than ever. And of course, I couldn't say that even more strongly than that. Next is Chanel Rion. Chanel's the former chief White House correspondent for One America News Network, OAN, and is the host of primetime show Fine Point. OAN is a relatively new international media outlet. Its independent journalists challenge established media via cable and 24/7 streaming. Chanel is also the founder of the National White House Correspondents Association that is dedicated to diversifying the press coverage of the White House. I met her because she was standing in the back, relegated to standing in the back of the press briefing room, in the president's press briefing room, although she did not go unnoticed by President Trump. He would call on her quite frequently. Chanel earned her degree in international relations from Harvard, and then went into journalism, has uncovered some of the most important stories in recent politics, including the Ukraine Burisma scandal involving the Biden family, and has very special insight in today's transformation of America's media. And then on her right is Ben Domenech. Ben is the editor-at-large of The Spectator and a Fox News contributor. He also hosts the Ben Domenech podcast. He's a distinguished journalist and sought-after commentator that we have also all seen, I'm sure. He co-founded The Federalist. He served as its publisher for a decade. He had a stint in the George W. Bush White House, came out as a speechwriter for Secretary Tommy Thompson as head of HHS, and then Senator Cornyn of Texas. He's been a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, at the Heartland Institute, and published widely. And with that, I will ask Molly to give her opening remarks.
Thank you, Scott. And I just want to say it has been a delight to see what's happening at New College. It's alarming how few of our public universities are doing what they should be doing to restore these institutions of higher learning. I know it's difficult work, but it's really exciting to see what you all are doing, and also love what you're doing with young leaders, and that is very important if we're going to save this country. I just had one thing I wanted to say before we open up the discussion. We know that a lot of people have lost trust in the corporate media. They do polling every year that shows that each year they reach new lows in terms of how many people trust the corporate media to report the news with any degree of fairness, accuracy, or honesty. I don't remember what it was last year, but it was something like 32% of Americans have any degree of trust in the media. These are really bad numbers. But what's interesting is if you drill down on them, very few independents and almost no conservatives have any trust in the media. So that number saying that 32%, what that really reflects is that a majority of left-wing people in America do trust the media. And so I think a lot of people who aren't left-wing think, well, nobody trusts them anymore. It doesn't matter what they're saying. but they actually have quite a bit of power to set the terms of debate. You might notice that even people who aren't left-wing will still respond to what the New York Times writes or what the Washington Post writes or what the Atlantic writes, and it gives them outsized power. I had the great privilege of being in Phoenix on Sunday for Charlie Kirk's memorial, and it was an absolutely amazing event, particularly to be there in the stadium. I've never been around that many people at one time. Everyone there was sort of a unity of purpose to mourn and honor Charlie Kirk's life and legacy. And you see what's happening, though, in corporate media with how I saw something like only 10% of Democrats can correctly identify the political motivation of Charlie Kirk's assassin. Only 10%. There's not really a dispute here. I mean, there's still more to learn, but his family have all been quite clear that he had spiraled into left-wing political ideology, that he was motivated by that he was having trouble having discussions with people who weren't. You know, he told his boyfriend that he had to kill Charlie Kirk because he thought that Charlie Kirk was hateful. You know, he was adopting, there's not really a variety of ideas here about what was his motivation, but only 10% of Democrats can correctly identify his motivation. And I think something like 33% think that the killer was motivated by right-wing ideology. So they actually believe the opposite of the truth. Now, how does that happen? Because we don't have a free press, we have a complete propaganda press, and it is actually harming the minds of a large percentage of our population, and it's something to take very seriously. Because even if you're getting your news in a better way and you're balancing sources and you are trying to test theories, a lot of people are still getting news from these corporate media that are not being honest in any way. You look at what the Los Angeles Times did. They platformed this woman who said that she thought maybe the killer was just trying to pretend to be left-wing, but he was really right-wing. That was elevated by different voices at The Atlantic, including, what is her name, Jamil Hill, who went wild with that. You had, of course, the New York Times and other outlets lying about Charlie Kirk's actual words, or taking, maybe they'd be sort of quote-unquote factual but not truthful. They would take a snippet and not mention that he was actually rebutting that or contesting a claim and saying that they were his own views. And so our media have been causing damage, our corporate media, this propaganda press, are causing damage at a time when really everybody should be united against this assassination and terrorism. And so we do need to continue to take them seriously and think about how to handle the damage that they're causing and how to effectively rebut it. Thanks.
I feel like I had prepared remarks, but I would just want to key off of everything you just said. Can you hear me now? The assassination of Charlie Kirk by this individual who was clearly radicalized by one side, and the subsequent coverage of it has really exposed the necessity of drawing lines in society. And why do we need to draw lines? When we don't draw lines, we delve into this world of moral relativism where up can be down and down can be up, men can be women, women can be men, and the young man who shot and killed Charlie Kirk was a man who was taught by the school system to not draw lines. He was confused, he lived in a state of chaos, and our entire education system is designed to do just that for our young children through upper education. And earlier, Dr. Atlas had cited C.S. Lewis, and I also had a C.S. Lewis quote I wanted to cite tonight. And it had to do with his critique on the dangers of raising our children in a world where you don't teach about the objective truths that exist in the universe. And there are objective truths, there are objective things that we know to be true. And it was in his series of lectures called The Abolition of Man. And in it, he says, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, We remove the organ and demand the function. We made men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. And when he says organs, he means the heart. So when you remove what's right and wrong, when you remove that from the discourse, you remove the heart of society. And so you unleash a world that is capable of evil. And what is evil? Evil is a world that says there is no good and there is no bad. There is no truth and there is no falsity in the world. And that is a deeply dangerous place to be when you have an entire journalistic class of kids who have been raised off of the magic of Woodward and Bernstein and this possibility that you can expose and take down an entire presidency, which we now look back on and realize was built a lot on some pretty dark motivations. You have an entire generation of kids who are raised to please an establishment who is teaching them there is no truth, there are only objective, subjective truths. But the problem is, it's not that we are on the side that says there is one objective truth. I think we have to fundamentally delineate the fact that we have hold of truths that are fractionalized. We have a portion of the truth, kind of like fractals. When you zoom out or zoom in, you're going to see more truth, but we see portions of truth that is objective, and you can identify what is true and what's not true. And the left, I think, for the most part, which dominates media, they have this idea that everybody has their own story and therefore their own perspectives of what can be true. So that is the problem that you're seeing as a philosophy trickle down in just about every single textbook in school from grade school onwards. And that is something that will take several more generations to undo. Perhaps the Charlie Kirk revival on a spiritual and academic and a discourse level will help speed that along. I hope it does. But we now are in a world where I think we have to understand there are certain factors of news that will always remain the same. We are now in a world where we're talking about hologram Elvises and AI-generated everything. That's a very scary and very different world to squeeze the First Amendment and free press into, quite different from the kind of world that our founding fathers envisioned when they drafted the Constitution and they were talking about the free press. When Thomas Jefferson was talking about the free press, I don't think he envisioned a world where you had deep fakes and videos that really blurred the line between what was real and what was manufactured by a machine. And so we are in a scary territory where very powerful forces will try to manipulate that. And I think the one comfort we can take is that, blurring notwithstanding, fact is not fantasy, and fantasy depends on the contrivance, not fact. So as long as we stick with that, we understand that there are hard lines we can draw there. And it goes back to this whole subjective truths, objective truths. Why does subjective truth catch hold in society so firmly? Because very powerful forces love it when society cannot draw lines. When they don't understand what's right or wrong, that is the most manipulated person you can find. If you find someone who can't say, I believe in this, and I believe in the following tenets in my life, that's a very difficult person to manipulate. And big tech, big pharma, big government, big intel, they love an entire industry that wants to continue to tell you that there are no boundaries, there are no real facts. You have to understand everybody's angle of the story and everybody's angle of the truth. No, we just have snippets of the truth. We need to keep searching, keep finding, keep seeking, keep asking questions. It was what we had to do in the briefing room back in 2019 when I was the lone conservative in that room. But going back to the theme of this talk, we're talking about truth, bias, power. Power loves when you are so unable to define where you stand that you can't be biased. But the press pretends that they're just this unbiased medium. And right now, going back to Molly's point, there's only 6 real companies that actually control 90% of the media. And yes, we're fractionalized now. Yes, we've democratized news. But the big six, those are the guys. ABC, Disney, Comcast, they're just six. If you look at the documentation, and they control 90% of the big press. Molly's absolutely right. It is important what they say, even if their numbers are dwindling. Washington Post has, what, 130,000 subscribers now? This is, I think, Molly, you probably get more views in one of your replies now. But, and same to you, Ben. But the power is still there in the sense that they still influence the thinkers. And that's what Dr. Atlas is doing. He's trying to raise a new generation of thinkers who can be in positions of power to genuinely challenge the big six. And I think that's our prerogative now. I think places like New College is doing that with the academic class, and it's so refreshing. We come from the swamp, technically, from DC, and it's so easy to get black-pilled there. It's so easy to believe that nothing good is ever going to come of anything, no matter how amazing the people in power are. But it's in rooms like this that it's truly, I think it's rejuvenating to realize that there's real Americans out there fighting and who can see the necessity of asking questions and drawing lines. But thank you for having us, and thank you for having the stage.
So I'm a filthy magazine salesman and a capitalist. So this is my magazine, The Spectator. It's been around since 1828. It's the oldest magazine in the world. Oldest English language magazine in the world, and I encourage you all to subscribe to it. But then I'm going to follow that up by saying, people don't read magazines anymore. And so you heard about the corporate side of things from Chanel and from Molly. I think I'll take the other aspect of this that we need to be aware of. For the first time, really, in our history, the majority of people who consume media are not reading or watching the media. They are not actually consuming where so many of these battles happen. So you may think about it in the context of us debating someone on TV. You know, Scott Jennings, for his sin, poor man. But the truth is that the overwhelming majority of Americans right now who consume media do not consume publications. They rarely watch news television that is not sporting news. We spend more time debating about whether something was a catch or not than whether something is true or not. And it's one of these things that I think we need to appreciate about this unique moment that we're in. And it's very different than when I was coming up a very, very long time ago, which is when you saw the places that had, you know, this enormous sway over the entire conversation, where a column in the New York Times could dictate whole conversations that played out in Washington, not just for days or weeks, but months. Where you could have, you know, interviews that would go on the Sunday shows that would dominate everyone's conversation in Washington, you know, in ways that could shift politics in massive and important reasons. I mean, you could have incidents that would go, you know, in the early stages of virality and destroy entire careers because of the response of these outlets. And now what we have is a landscape in which people think of themselves as consuming media, but what they actually say when you dial into it is that they are consuming social media that their friends are sharing, for which there is even less degree of responsibility. If you hammer away at the Atlantic, if you hammer away at the New York Times, if you hammer away asking and demanding for correction, you might eventually get it in a little note at the bottom, which they won't address at all in public unless they absolutely have to. But instead, I think what you see is right now a landscape where the number one Substacker, and I'm on Substack, I'm a supporter of the idea that people should be able to write their own newsletters, but the number one Substacker, Heather Cox Richardson, is a leftist historian who went out and said exactly the lie that Molly was talking about. Why do you have 33% of Democrats in that YouTube poll saying falsely that this shooter, whatever you can say about the debate of his own politics, he was not on the right. He clearly was not. He had every witness, every indication that we have, there is no basis for that claim. And yet Heather Cox Richardson made it to a vast outlet of people who who get her newsletter, who pay for it, and who trust her. And then it goes everywhere. And you're just, for someone like me who used to be, challenging articles, you're in a situation where you're playing whack-a-mole with all these folks all around the internet who have their own trusted groups and have their own trusted fiefdoms. And then you go on a place like Reddit, which has vastly more readership than a place like the New York Times. And you can find on their front page yesterday, there was a thread of more than 10,000 comments devoted to the idea that everything that you saw from Erica Kirk was a performance, that none of it was real, that all of this was pre-planned. There's another thread today suggesting, all these different manners of other people to blame for what's going on, and that this is all a fraud. And then, of course, when you get a little deeper into it, you get the comparison to Nazi rallies and Klan events, and then you get the people who are saying everybody who's in this room deserves the same ending as Charlie. And all that stuff is just there. I mean, it's all there for you to read. Now, I don't, for your own mental health, suggest that you do it. I do it because it's kind of bracing, but you have to understand, I think, what's really going on. And what's going on is that people are repeating these lies to each other in these vacuums, and there is no degree to which a paywalled story from the New York Times now has more resonance in their head than an Instagram post from someone who they like or look up to. And that could be a celebrity, doesn't need to be anybody who knows anything about anything. The point is that when people talk about media, we're not talking about the same organizations, corporations that we used to talk about. They're still there and they're still doing terrible things. But I think that the problem is that the left's response to this, as we saw during Scott's tenure in the White House, was to engage in tyranny, direct tyranny over what people were saying. We have Alphabet today, the owners, obviously, of YouTube and Google, spinning their way in front of Jim Jordan's committee about, the terrible Joe Biden White House. They were forcing us to take down YouTube accounts against even our rules, and they were invoking the opinions of people from Europe, of all places, to say that somebody who's posting from here in Sarasota, they had to get their account taken down. Well, we swear we didn't want to do it. It wasn't us. Yeah. I think this audience is smart enough to know that that's not the case. But look, the point is we're dealing with a landscape that is that I actually, and I've been around so many people, hardworking people, who have been about media accountability when it comes to the national stage. Most of them on the right, who talked about bias, 25 years ago, et cetera. And then they started talking about the corporate influences involved. They started expanding their minds in terms of how much that bias could take hold in different ways and not just ideological ways. But we're now dealing with something that I think we haven't really wrapped our arms around, and we have a lot of people and organizations that are built for fighting the last battle, the last war. And I think that after this Charlie Kirk event and everything else that came from it, I think if your eyes aren't opened to how big of a problem this is, that you can have a direct line from what happened with Charlie Kirk, what happened with Jimmy Kimmel, to a guy taking pot shots at a news station, and yet the national media doesn't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about it at all. They don't want to talk about the fact that there was more violence connected to Jimmy Kimmel getting taken off the air for, oh my gosh, a couple of days for saying something false on broadcast TV. Then there was more violence connected to that than connected to what happened to Charlie Kirk. And what does that say about both sides in this scenario? I think that, unfortunately, we are living through a time in which this level of tyranny is being exercised and demanded by so many different people, by people who are interacting with media through these new outlets or relatively new outlets, and people who are interacting with it from the old outlets, just trying to keep a clamp down on, the things that they view sometimes from their own side as being dangerous. I don't think we really have an infrastructure yet in terms of a pushback against this, and we need one. We need one desperately. It starts, I think, with training the minds of young people who are consuming this media, to see it for what it is and to think critically about it, And that's something that I think here at New College, they're devoted to because it's of the utmost importance, but it's going to take more than just that. It's going to take going after these new problems with a full recognition of how toxic and dangerous this mental broken mind virus can be in so many different instances to make people believe things which just aren't true.
Okay, thanks very much for those remarks. I'm going to start out the questions, and then I'm hoping that everybody in the audience can directly ask what they want to ask. I want to pick up on the bias topic here, because yes, of course, there is a sort of a fragmented, if maybe that's the right word, of the media and what people read. But as you said, Ben, even though people aren't reading necessarily the Washington Post or the New York Times, they read the amplification of it on social media. So I think these things have sort of still massive impact. And I want to cite some data, because we hear everybody on the conservative side say, well, there's an obvious bias, but I haven't yet heard anybody on Fox News give the numbers. And I was telling my wife the other day, I have the numbers, and I'm going to say the numbers here. Because the bias is actually quantifiable. The bias is stark. It is clear in the data, in the analysis of what is said. And part of it is subtle, and part of it is very explicit. Here's the sort of subtleness of it. In the past decade, the coupling of the word extreme or far to the word right, conservative right, compared to the coupling of extreme or far to the word left, that difference is 5 to 1 in 10 years. And the big violators of that, MSNBC, 18 to 1 ratio, PBS 42 to 1, where they say extreme right versus how many times they ever say extreme left. There's an extremism that has been inculcated into the public about conservatives. And then more explicitly, Trump or MAGA conservatives were literally called fascists or, quote, threat to democracy. MSNBC, 10,500 segments, which was 5.2 billion views. The New York Times mentioned this 620 times and had 310 million views. This is the social media amplification factor. Biden's speech in Philadelphia in 2022, he specifically, quote, he said, quote, Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundation of our republic, unquote. This is the most visible, the most amplified person in the world in the news. He's president of the United States. And then he reiterated that, quote, 15 major addresses from 2020 to 2025. These are the things that legitimize violent action. And I used to think, and I want to get, now I'm going to ask my question, I used to think that, oh, okay, this kind of stuff sets off somebody who's really a lunatic, a fringe person who can't function. I'm not convinced that's who it sets off anymore. I think regular people, that sets off into violent action. And I say that knowing that I believe strongly there's a lot of evidence that the Gen Z group is very damaged psychologically, have a massive explosion of mental health harms. They have a massive explosion of gender confusion. There's a 420% increase in people who say that they're transgender in the past decade. In that generation, there's a 1,250% increase in people saying they are non-binary. There is a tripling since 2012 and a doubling in 5 years in people identifying as LGBTQ, a doubling in 5 years. That's not a biological phenomenon, that's a social contagion. And so we're dealing with people, like it or not, who are what I would call damaged, unstable. They're not, this is coming from somebody who, we have parents, my generation, who fought in world wars, who came here with literally nothing except the will to live freely. And now we have a generation that thinks that hearing words is violence. So I think we have a dangerous population. It's not just lunatics and fringe people who are set off by this stuff. So that's sort of a long-winded way to say, what do we do with with the media that is really focused on editorializing, on convincing people to believe something rather than on reporting the information and letting people digest it. And do you see that as changing without, because I am strongly opposed to censorship. I don't think that's the answer at all. I'd like to hear your opinions on that. Molly?
Okay. I was like, I'll see what other people have to say, and then I will add in my own thoughts. I actually think the situation is far worse than what you just said. And to take your first thing about how many times people on the right are called extreme versus how many times people on the left are. This is occurring at a time when the right has had periods of extremism. This is not one of them. You know, their leader is a former Democrat who's president. There's just not, I kept on seeing people call Charlie Kirk an extremist. Very moderate Republican. I think one of the reasons why his assassination resonated with so many people is they realized, oh, they're killing us for totally normal, mainstream, conservative views.
Can I interrupt for just to add, don't you think that that's driven by the religious side of things?
Well, yes,
Meaning
but I
that-
might mean it, I was thinking, what's happening on the left at this time?
Well, but I think that just obviously everything you're saying is true, but it seems to me that they think he's extreme because he talks about the Bible and Christianity and church and all of these things that for us is not extreme, but that for them is like a signifier. So much of what I saw about him is just like, he's a radical Christian who hates everybody, and it's like such the opposite.
Yeah, well, not to further go on a tangent, but I saw that some people were responding to the Christian memorial service by saying that they'd never seen anything like it. It was like, you don't have to be an evangelical or a Christian to at least know that a lot of Americans are. And if you're a journalist, it's an outright obligation to understand how people worship. But at the time, though, the right is being called extreme, the left has kind of devolved into some pretty radical ideas, including on gender ideology. We've got mutilation of healthy body parts. We've got sterilization of children. By any metric, pretty extreme behavior. So when you're calling the right extreme and not the left, in this context, it's actually, in my view, much, much worse than that. As far as what to do about it? Okay. I was thinking also about, in the context of the assassination, do you remember after Trump was elected in 2016, a lot of the people in the media said, we must not normalize him or his supporters. So what they meant by that is, you can't act like this is normal. Well, this was a reflection of their own views, where they had spent the entire 2016 campaign assuring everybody that there was no way in the world that Donald Trump would ever win. They would just say it outright, like you'd be on panels, I know we've experienced this, and people would just mock the idea. And rather than respond to his election by saying, you know what, we don't understand the country that we cover, that's probably because everyone we employ is left-wing, they don't talk to normal people, we should change the way we hire or promote people, we should change the way we cover things. No, they said, we're going to come up with an outlandish conspiracy theory that Donald Trump stole the election by colluding with Russia, and we're going to say you can't normalize him. And so they have spent years basically laying the groundwork for people to live in fear of being publicly known as someone who voted for the President of the United States. That was what 2016 through 2020 was like, and they were trying to do it again, although I think the fact that he won he got the top vote count made that much more difficult. When you say you cannot normalize these people, you can't have them on television and treat them like they're real people with real ideas, it leads a large majority of normal people, like you say, to not accept reality and not just deal with the reality of what the electoral situation is like. So one of the ideas I have, you take again 2016 through 2020, Chuck Todd every day was hosting, Meet the Press? I'm so bad at remembering. Okay. And every day he would be out there pushing the Russia collusion hoax. If a Republican came on his show, he would demand that they kind of carry on with him about the Russia collusion hoax, or that they, say something to He would just badger them about it day in and day out. He really perpetuated this outlandish and ridiculous conspiracy theory that caused a lot of damage to the country and maybe even the world. And so when Virginia had a gubernatorial race, what was that? What year was that when Youngkin won? 21. Okay. So in Virginia, the Republican Party of Virginia had Chuck Todd host their gubernatorial debate. I'm like, maybe don't treat people like that, like they should be legitimized after spending all these years. Or you see people go on some of these left-wing media outlets and get in this like defensive crouch. I mean, first of all, they're honoring these left-wing media outlets by being on their show, which is something they should think about whether they really want to do. Do you really want to legitimize these people that are just spreading insane conspiracy theories? And if you are going to go on, you should be ready to do battle. Like I always think about these Republicans. I'm not like a political strategist or anything, so keep that in mind. But if a Republican politician was going to go into a debate with his Democrat opponent, would he like concede the premise of every question from the Democrat? Would he cower in fear that they might not like him? Or would he actually understand, that's my political opponent, I'm going to fight them? And yet, when you have a far more effective political opponent in the form of CNN or MSNBC, for some reason they act like these people are operating in good faith, decades of work to the contrary, and they don't go prepared to do battle. And so I think if you're going to go on some of these left-wing conspiracy outlets, don't treat them like they're better than they are, or don't go on, and if you're going to go on, you better be really good at fighting them.
To Molly's point, I do get so frustrated seeing how those who are on the side of liberty and free speech are so logical that when they do engage on the left, they have to respond to every single point. And when the real response should be reframing the question. Because the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Atlantic are experts at framing the question, pulling at the heartstrings, and then coming up with their own terminology. So for the longest time, we were talking about illegal immigration. That's not the term to use. This is border burglary. This is people who are burglarizing our country.
I would be happy if they said illegal immigration. Isn't it normally like undocumented travelers to our country?
Chest feeders are women, right? So this goes back to, I want to go back to like an earlier point I was making about the fact that you have an entire industry, an entire complex that says we cannot define things. You cannot just assume things about people. You can't judge a book by their cover. You must ascribe to everybody's truth. Everyone has their own truth. But then, what's so sad is that the side that is most gullible to that message also tend to be the most insecure people you've ever met. They cannot stand that they're in the minority. So instead of just taking their obscure beliefs that I want to call women chest feeders and illegal immigrants undocumented workers, instead of just being comfortable with the idea that they're in the minority, they're so insecure that the rest of the country does not ascribe to that belief. They have to villainize the rest of us and say, you have to ascribe to my minority belief in order to make me feel comfortable. And that is the entire media complex. When I walked into the White House briefing room for the first time, I wasn't trained in journalism. I was simply trained in the way that old-fashioned journalists were trained. I was apprenticed to someone. I had some core skills that were just honed in and said, this is the kind of the terminology you use in journalism. And then I was thrown in that briefing room, and I was stunned to see how puerile that room was. I mean, these were children who couldn't stand that the whole world didn't love them and didn't revere them and bow down to every step that they took. I mean, these people thought that they were
They're also
Rambos.
filthy like children.
They're very filthy. That, by the way, that briefing room desperately needs an overhaul. I know that you guys have been in there too.
Fumigation.
It does need a fumigation. There's rats, there's cockroaches, there's flooding. And it does feel like a 1980s Winnebago downstairs.
I've been in better Winnebagos than that. Seriously.
It's terrible. So anyway, they carry on this kind of moral high ground that is extremely obscure. And then if you don't subscribe to them, they will insist that you do. And then if you don't subscribe to them, then you're a nut. How do we resolve it? I think we have to also not only talk about retraining our youth, but it does us no good if you have someone like Caitlin Collins, who was ostensibly trained as a Republican growing up, I guess, and she entered into like the Daily Caller world. She was a conservative. But the only way she succeeded in journalism was to cater to the establishment that was going to give her power and influence. And what was that establishment? They all had an agenda. They all took their marching orders from bigger forces that were not the American people and were certainly not truth. And so I think that fundamentally, yes, we need to retrain our kids and make sure that our kids know that if you're trained a certain way, you're not going to be shunned when you go out into the real world. How we fix that? I mean, it's monetary. We have to invade the boards. We have to reshuffle activist corporations who are pushing a very particular dialogue that comes to them from the UN. We have to restructure the ascendance protocol, I guess, the way that kids who get out and are educated, they're educated in journalism or whatever it is, they need to know that they can succeed in the world without having to cater their grades to liberal professors, to liberal shareholders, to liberal bosses. And that is a much broader conversation than just what's wrong with media and bias right now.
So I want to sort of turn your question back around a little bit, Scott, and to Molly's point about the difference in terms of extremism. Let's just think about this for a second. The biggest, largest, most powerful city in America, New York City, is a few months away from electing an actual Marxist. Not just a communist, a Marxist, okay? A utopian Marxist and failed rapper. Now, why does that happen? Does that happen because the New York Times fell in love with him, or the Atlantic fell in love with him, or CNN fell in love with him? No, it happens because of TikTok. It happens because of social. And so then those legacy media organizations, they take on a different role, which we've seen them doing to the hilt in the past several weeks, which is then legitimizing him as being perfectly acceptable. The New York Times saying, well, he's not really a communist, he just wants, people to eat and be nice to each other and things like that. And you see him go through this laundering experience of, no, he's not actually a wacko crazy person who wants to spend, billions of dollars on crazy leftist ideas, who wants to turn New York City into a sanctuary city that will fly your kid who wants to be trans, your teenager, into New York City to get surgery and put them up in a hotel and pay for all of it with taxpayer money, which is a thing that he wants to do, okay? I'm not making that up. My point is just this. This guy is so extreme that everything he says is like those most extreme Kamala Harris positions where the media would react by saying, oh, she never said that, only to find that, yes, she said that repeatedly.
On videotape.
on videotape and in a survey, and not just once. So the point is, we are dealing with a situation where now these legacy media organizations, which are very important and do guide corporate America and guide policy among the Democratic leaders, et cetera, but they are also terribly frightened of these extremists within their coalition who are now, and I've said this on my podcast, and I said it to Brett Baer the other night. I truly believe they now actually represent a majority of the leftist coalition. I'm not sure how quickly we're going to see that played out in poll data, but it's one of the things that I truly have shifted my opinion on in recent years. I believe that the extreme is no longer the extreme. I think it's close to, if not already, the majority. And what does that mean? It means that those legacy institutions now understand we're not in charge anymore. Okay, well, we need to survive, and we need to make sure that Laurene Powell Jobs isn't next on the list of the people that gets targeted for being some corporate person that can't continue to pay for the Atlantic, and all the other hood ornament projects that the left corporate side of things pays for. They want to stay in good with these kids. And to me, that makes what they're doing even worse on some level, because at least before they thought, our role is to adjudicate and maybe push back against the extremes of leftism. Now, that, of course, that's not a principle. It's just that they think that won't be able to win. You know, they didn't target, you know, the extremes on their left side. They didn't target, you know, sort of AOC because they thought she was going to be a problem. They thought that she was going to put, you know, a Democratic seat in the actual mix of a Republican maybe accidentally winning. The point is just, we are now dealing with a situation where they are upside down from where they were before. They're no longer in charge, and they're trying to adapt to this current scenario, and that makes what they're doing all the worse and more villainous, because they are whitewashing, or I'm sure that that's a trigger warning, the extremism within their ranks to a degree that I think, unfortunately, New York City may have to live through this experience to learn from it, which is not something you want to see happen in America.
But I do hope they don't censor any bit of it. I hope that we also see conservatives on the right too, trying to censor, you know, this horrific shooting. You have conservatives, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, at one point, I think she walked back some of it, but she said we need to go after people who spout hate speech. And I think we need to take a fundamentally different view. I mean, if they're going to be nuts, let the world see how nuts they are.
Well, it's also, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I just want to say, I think this is the key topic, really, because censorship, because the right, in my view, has its own version of cancel culture, has its own version of censorship. And we can't let that happen. And so, you know, the question is, what is going on? You know, Google complained, Ben brought this up, that it was the Biden government that pressured them to do things. And, you know, I was in the Trump administration in 2020. I was taken down by Twitter, by YouTube, and I thought, okay, I went into the people in the White House. I said, you'd think that the advisor to the president, the people should hear what he's saying during an emergency. And their answer was, Scott, be quiet. They took down President Trump. So, I mean, it was so extreme, and it was done by the companies themselves. It was not done by the media. That's an excuse that it was done by the government. So there's two issues. One is, okay, it's sort of low-hanging fruit that the government can't demand. Maybe it's a low-hanging fruit. A private company to take down stuff. But I think the social media companies themselves are so guilty of harming the public by their own censorship that it's made me think, for a lot of reasons, Elon Musk is the most important man in my lifetime.
Yes.
Well,
I want to add, agreed, and the villainizing of Elon Musk, I think, was very wrong by certain corners of the conservative movement. But at the same time, to your point, Dr. Atlas, if there was any one network who had absolutely every reason in the world to go completely all on board with the whole let's avenge all the censorship we have gone through, it's OAN. I mean, when I reported on Eric Shiramella, this was a name you still may not know, but this was a guy, he basically worked for CIA, he was a source for Adam Schiff, and fueled the entire Russiagate situation against Trump. And I was one of at the time, the only people on cable news reporting on this man's name, saying, here's the definitions, the descriptors that Adam Schiff has leaked out, and here's the profile of Eric Shiramella. The odds that they are two different people is extremely low. So we reported on this, and no sooner had I reported on this, and I was new at the White House at the time, my CEO at OAN receives a phone call from a very big tech company. And on conference call in his headquarters at OAN in San Diego, no joke, the representative from this big tech company said, you are not to report and say that name ever again, or we will deplatform you. And to us, a small family, we're not the Murdochs, we're not, it's a small family-owned business, literally owned by one family. You can trace all the money to one family. They have not sold out, one family in San Diego. That meant the loss of over millions of dollars every month, because they were getting a lot of money from our revenue from this big tech platform. And on principle, they said, fine, deplatform us. We will not be told who to report on and who not to report on.
That's wonderful. There's an aspect of that story that proves that YouTube is lying in some sense here. I actually think government-led censorship is a problem, and I'll talk about that in a second. But a United States senator used the name Eric Ciaramella. He actually had the name on a board, and YouTube censored that like they were a bunch of Soviets, in the 1940s or something. They actually like whited out the board so you couldn't see the name. Now, Eric Ciaramella was trying to claim to be a whistleblower. That's actually probably not true given the way that he went about it, but there's never been a hard and fast rule that we don't name whistleblowers in the media. I've covered whistleblowers for decades. I know how this goes. And this groupthink and hysteria, the reason why nobody wanted to name Eric Ciaramella is because Eric Ciaramella was very close to the Biden family and very close to some of the problems that were happening with Ukraine corruption. The censorship was designed to help a political party. But even when a member of the United States government said the name, YouTube censored him. And I also just want to say, I'm not like a huge critic of Chief Justice John Roberts, but he also refused to say the name. And it was just kind of a disturbing moment. I was like, this doesn't feel like America right now. Because he was actually supposed to read the questions, and he refused to read the question about Ciaramella.
And beyond that, and again, this was marching orders from the DNC, essentially. And the marching orders included Jim Jordan just 2 years ago with Judiciary Committee revealed that the Biden administration had someone who literally put my name on a list. I think your name was on a list.
I'm on the government. My husband got me a Christmas sweater which said, "Are you nice? Are you naughty? Or are you on a government watch list?" And that was checked. So I've got my own Christmas sweater.
I want that shirt, Cortland. But we were put on a list. It was Tom Fitton, you, me, and about 20 people, 20 conservative outlets, who the White House specifically told someone, said, this is a list of names. Make sure they are pretty much, their output is reduced on Twitter. That was an order from the White House. Jim Jordan revealed it.
Yes, and I want to just say, it's also worse than that. So YouTube on its own, Google on its own, they're censoring left and right, and they're doing it on their own. If you really want to blame a government, it's probably European governments that are also highly pressuring them, which have much worse rules on speech. But the Federalist, in our reporting on government censorship, realized that we were being censored by our government. And so we filed a lawsuit against the State Department. It's not the only department that was censoring us, but it was the one where we thought we had the best case. And we're in the process of winning that right now. We're in settlement talks. The State Department has already admitted that they were censoring us, which, when you're a publication, that's seeking your destruction. And what they were doing was financing the startup of censorship tools and then marketing those censorship tools with taxpayer funds, a clear violation of the First Amendment. And like I said, they have admitted that they did this. We're in settlement talks right now. But when you get targeted by the United States government, and it's not just that agency, it's a ton of agencies, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and those agencies are talking to the big tech companies, and they are coordinating the means by which they censor. That is horrific election interference. When you think about how you vote on all sorts of things. It could be how you want a pandemic responded to, how you want children with gender confusion treated, what you think about the Second Amendment. And when our government and big tech companies are censoring, minimizing the spread of information that they don't like and elevating the spread of information, it is amazing that the election results aren't like routinely worse than they are because of this level of interference. And I don't think Americans realize how bad it is, and you should all realize it's a very bad situation.
Yeah, I agree. I want to mention AI and open up a little bit about that discussion. I was invited to speak on a panel in censorship at a university a couple months ago, and it was me, and there were two other people. One person was about university free speech, and the other person was a computer science expert from my university that I work at, Stanford University, who was key part of what's called the Stanford Internet Observatory Project. And her whole 5-minute opening remark content was how excited she was that Stanford and other places are very sophisticated and working on, quote, better and better censorship tools, unquote. So this is sort of, AI is not just fake information, and I think that's very tricky to navigate, but I wonder what your thoughts are on the sophisticated level of censorship, because not everybody buys Twitter no matter what the cost to open up Twitter, like Elon did. I just wonder where we're going with that, and any other thoughts you have on how to function in that kind of world of media.
I'm just going to add one more thing since we've been in this censorship battle. One of the things that's so frustrating, like I said, Marco Rubio, in the pages of the Federalist, admits the State Department was censoring us. But our issue there was that they were creating censorship tools and marketing those censorship tools. They still exist. They're still going, and now, thanks to AI, they're completely programmed to be like weaponized beyond your wildest imagination. And the errors get in early with the functions there. So if they decide that one of the things they're going to say is, if you agree with the CDC, we will elevate you, and if you disagree with the CDC, we won't. That's built for like the long haul, and it's very difficult to eradicate it later. One of the things that we got stuck with on these censorship tools, they would say, okay, well, the New York Times won a Pulitzer for their perpetuation of the Russia collusion hoax. We'll give them a 10. The Federalist debunked the Russia collusion hoax, which we believe. We'll give you a 0. You don't get to look at the means by which they judge these things, who's judging them, how they're judging them, but it's cooked in forever. And so
it's tied into ad revenue. So they demonetize us in that regard. So the fact that the Federalists survived, the fact that OAN survived the past 5 years, we should be given awards for having survived monetarily.
Yes.
By exactly what Molly just laid out. Because
we and our generous donors who helped us survive once the ad revenue was cut off. But yes.
OAN did not have generous donors. We just had the love of subscribers across the country, and it was still a huge, 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 huge thing. But at the same time, NewsGuard, right? But I want to remind everyone of a name. Remember Nina Jankowicz?
Disinformation czar?
Misinformation Mary Poppins. She would sing all these songs about how lovely it is to censor people. The story of her story is highly illustrative. She was highlighted by social media. People just threw a fit, dug up all her old clips. It was a phenomenal exhibition of what happens when the people get involved and they start digging, doing the job of the press. They expose her. Biden administration couldn't take the pressure, and they said, you know what, it's much better if we just let her go. But they didn't really let her go. They said we fired her, right? And they removed her from DHS, where she was ostensibly going to head the disinformation, or whatever it was called. Whatever it was called. It was a disinformation bureau, right? So what happened to her? She gets shipped off to England. And what happens there? That's where you develop all of the software that is going to use AI to censor us in highly sophisticated ways, and she will help develop the software out there. And then what happens then? States like California buy that software and re-import it back in here. So we may not be funding that research or software or system, but they just outsource it to another country. A liberal state adapts it, like California, Oregon, Washington, and then pretty soon it just spreads the rest of the way. That is a system they are going to definitely use with AI. Recently, I saw a clip that showed a bunch of Silicon Valley bros sitting on stage, and they were wearing these glasses. And they said, these glasses will help you think, and it will actually censor out, like, if you're being super biased. And they were advertising this as if it was a really good thing. The glasses are only $300. That spirit is embodied by the left. The left is deeply excited by AI. And I'm in my 3rd year of law school right now. I am really, my focus is on AI and constitutional civil liberties, because I strongly believe the very people who should be grabbing hold of AI and understanding it are exactly the people who are bearing their heads on it. And the people who are deeply excited about all this AI development are the UN folks, the globalist mindset people. So we can't bury our heads on AI. We have to go in full throttle, both feet, both hands, be completely up to date with it. Because if we don't, the Nina Jankowiczes are just going to develop this stuff overseas, outsource it, and bring it back home.
I'll just real quick, since we're doing a lot of Lewis tonight. This is a perfect example of the vilest tyranny being that done for your own good. He has this line about better to be run by robber barons than one who has the moral idea that what they're doing to you is for your own good, and you're just too stupid or infantile or all the other ways that they view you in order to know better. The one thing I will say about AI that I think is going to be particularly interesting is its prevalence and its ubiquity is also an opportunity for people who have skill sets that are not AI dependent to actually shine. When I started out, doing research in journalism, I would go and have to work at microfiche. I don't know if any of you remember those. In order to find old articles, and I dug up more than one story, just finding things that had been forgotten because this was in a kind of a pre-internet age. One of the things that I think we have to acknowledge is that in recent years, internet search functionality has become total dog crap. And with that comes an increasing reliance on people who have the capability to use alternative tools to find things and to develop them into databases and other information sources that are of enormous utility when you are trying to dig into a story. A lot of them are not themselves writers or people who can necessarily tell that story well, but when you find someone who has that type of doggedness to just look at these things, these data points over and over and over again and then collect them, they can prove invaluable. Within within hours really of knowing who the shooter was in the Kirk situation, multiple accounts that I pay attention to that do this kind of work had very quickly turned up both the video game accounts and I actually am on a lot of those platforms, don't judge me. But Discord accounts, Steam accounts, the various, you could have records of the different games that he played and the comments that they made. That's how we learned, for instance, we found the diggers had found the Reddit account of the roommate, boyfriend, discussing their challenges with taking different hormones and things like that on public Reddit threads and the like. That's the type of research that I think is going to become a lot more valuable in this day and age when AI is not just going to be used to create lies, which is most of what you hear about from the Censorship Bureau. We're like, oh, the stupid people are going to believe these, videos that are created. Well, I kind of put that into the same category mentally as the fact that there was, within one of the Mueller documents, the inclusion when they went after a couple of Russians of the fact that they had created the Jesus Christ endorses Donald Trump ad, which was seen by, I believe, fewer than 1,000 total people. Don't think it changed any votes. But it's one of those things where I think the actual problem with AI is going to be how much it works to hide and disguise the truth that other traditional journalistic methods and researchers could actually unearth and follow. I think that they are going to be in the business of hiding things so much better. Humans, bureaucrats especially, often make mistakes, and if you know how to look for it, you know how to find it, you can find those mistakes and break wide open stories that they do not want you to know. They rely on you not looking for those mistakes. And so if you find one of these investigative journalists who just spends all their time looking into it, one of my favorites is our former intern, Gabe Kaminsky, who's now at the Free Press, formerly at the Examiner, unearthed so many of these things. And why? Because he just grabs onto something and he never lets it go. That's going to be a skill set we need a hell of a lot more of from this next generation of journalists. And it's going to be, I think, especially useful at breaking open the lies that they tell us with AI.
Okay, are there any questions in the audience? Yes.
Sorry, 1 second. Thank you so much. I just want to say again, thank you for everyone for being here. And you guys are brilliant, some journalists who I actually like. So thank you. It's amazing. And we're going to get into the Q&A. And so if you do have a question, we'd love to be able to have everyone hear you. So please, there are 2 little corridors right here. If you could line up, our lovely interns here at New College of Florida are going to have some microphones so you can come and ask a question. I do please ask that you keep your questions brief so we can try and get a lot of answers and a lot of people tonight. And thank you. Please line up here and we'll be starting the Q&A. Either side is fine. We'll have 2 people. Thank you.
Is it on?
One moment, please, while we figure out this technical difficulty.
We can just, here, if you can speak loud.
Yeah, my concern really is more not necessarily the left media, but the right, because even with the narrative that's being brought forth on the present shooter, Charlie Kirk, are all the questions being asked, and that's what my concern has always been, is not the left, but is the right. There's a lot of times you can't even ask questions, because I was deplatformed with Trump in January 20, and it took me over a year to get my account back, but just by asking questions. And I just wondered if is the right, do you feel like the right is doing the same thing as far as asking not the right questions or digging deep enough to get to the truth of everything that's happening?
Well, I think it's a little bit early in this particular story with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Obviously, people really need to, there's a lot that needs to be found out. You know, I think one of the narratives that was being set right away is like, nobody on earth has ever acted more alone than this guy did. And I think it's way too early to say any of that, including like, literally how did he become the way he is would be very good to know. And so we are, at the Federalist, we're investigating left-wing ideology and terror networks. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is Antifa has had a huge, and I'm not saying this guy is, I mean, he had some Antifa-related slogans, but I'm not saying that we know he's related to Antifa. But Antifa is a group that has gotten a lot of power in the Pacific Northwest with almost no media scrutiny. I mean, a little bit, but the corporate media do not want to focus in on Antifa. They might even say, like, Antifa isn't even a thing. And meanwhile, they are organizing riots. They organized the riot at the long-running riot at the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse in Portland during the 2020 BLM riots. And so it does take time, money, energy to investigate these things. And I'm just saying, it takes a little bit of effort. And it takes real investigative journalism, and you have to give that a little bit of time.
And just one additional point on that, Andy No has obviously done extensive reporting on this and taken a lot of risk for it. And one of the points that he will often make is that people they think about this in a little bit different way than what's actually going on, in the sense that people talk about it in terms of these terror networks having direct funding from major places, when in reality, the funding goes to attorneys and to other support mechanisms so that they can get out of jail quickly, and all of the things that are sort of follow on to it. So that's one of the things that I think is important. It's a distinction that I frankly think not a lot of people, even on the right, are making about the level to which this is a problem that has to be clarified, especially at the moment when, to your point, you know, it's just, you know, it's an emanation. It's a vague thought, you know, that's out there, Antifa.
Yeah, I want to add, because your question about not having the information or not asking questions vis-a-vis what Molly said too, I think there's 2 things going on here. One is that Kash Patel is trying to say, we're going to give information. We're not going to hide, like the Butler, Pennsylvania shooter we know nothing about still and all this. He wants to be transparent. He's pushing for transparency. But with that, you get a lot of information that I'm not so sure it's smart to give all the details before the case is litigated, or even to give a lot of details to the public about other things like international security stuff. I'm fine with, I think the government has to have some things that are not publicly disseminated. So I think there's two things going on. I feel, I'm taking him at face value when he does the press conferences and he says he wants to be transparent. I'm actually thinking to myself, as just a non-media person, I'm a little worried about hearing all these details. Let's do the case and see what the jury says about this. I don't have a need to know everything before they actually know what they're talking about.
Thank you. I'm experiencing cognitive dissonance tonight. I heard a very chilling term, the new tyranny. And I have to ask, how do you address or reconcile when the new tyranny uses the First Amendment as a sword and not a shield?
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit? I think I know where you're going, but I don't want to get off on the wrong direction. Go ahead.
Conservatives, I believe, are very protective of the First Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm seeing what I appear to see is the First Amendment being used as a sword to attack those who want to protect the First Amendment. And rather than, I'm trying to communicate, we want to protect the First Amendment and we want to prevent censorship.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm struggling with how to address that through the use of the First Amendment to be able to counter those who would attack dialogue because they have as much, if not a greater right to the First Amendment.
So you're essentially talking about the heckler's veto, right? I mean, or in this, in this case, the idea that the opponents have the right to speak, and that this is, an inherent clash. Well, I think that's, what comes back to the original. Am I right in saying that? I want to make sure I understand.
Are you talking about defaming someone and you're allowed to do that, or not defaming literally in the legal sense, but defaming someone, discrediting someone as saying, oh, I have the right to say that, and you're saying that shouldn't be?
I hear a lot of conservatives protecting Jimmy Kimmel's right to speak, but I don't hear the left and the far left protecting people on the right, such as Charlie Kirk's right to have spoken.
So here's the thing that I think is just astounding about that situation. First off, we have Jake Tapper going on with perhaps the only late night person less talented than Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, and saying that this is the worst example of government censorship he's ever seen in his life. I don't know where he's been the last 10 years, but certainly he hasn't been paying attention to anything other than his buddies. Look, I strongly believe in the First Amendment and the right of Jimmy Kimmel to say things that are false and wrong and things like that. But when he does it on a nationally broadcast, channel, there are certain rules that are in place that have been adjudicated through the Supreme Court and are founded in law over the years that ascribe certain limits to what you can say in those scenarios. He can say whatever the heck he wants when he goes down to his local, but he can't say something like that and not expect consequences from it. The First Amendment gives you the right to free speech. It does not guarantee you the right to a job on ABC. And that to me is a huge, and I want to say that the real danger to me that I see from the First Amendment, for the First Amendment at this juncture, is that other methods will be used to make what Charlie Kirk did consistently impossible, effectively. And the reasons that will be used will be, we cannot afford the security your presence on campus will require. We cannot guarantee that you will be safe going around here. And because of that, you aren't allowed here. I don't know if you've seen this footage from this most recent British protest, but there is a Jewish man who is observing a protest, a pro-Palestinian protest in the streets in the UK, and the police there are accosting him that they are going to have to arrest him because he is causing the disturbance by being there and I'm quoting, the officer being obviously Jewish. Now, that's the problem that I think we are running toward when it comes to an American academia in which the majority of campuses don't have a single actual academic who's willing to stick their head up and even book a room for a lot of these organizations that are trying to host these kinds of conversations. I think we need to have a very clear conversation about the First Amendment. But look, we cannot concede this point about you have the right to say these things. You do not have the right to have this job. You do not have the right to have this platform. And if the advertisers and the affiliates say our people don't want to watch you anymore, that's not a First Amendment problem. That's a you problem and a business problem, and the fact you haven't known what comedy is for the last 30 years.
But that's not even a censorship issue. I think it's a false claim from what I know, and I don't necessarily know anything, that the government actually was censoring Jimmy Kimmel. I think the network said, you're out, it's not funny, you're a loser money-wise anyway.
What they actually said was, you just have to apologize, and he refused.
Well, but I'm saying the government, it's not true in, it's okay that, I'm not for him being censored. I don't think there's a rule that says he can't say, look at, all the vile stuff he spews. That's fine. People can turn the channel and he'll be kicked out of the job.
But
it's not censorship.
But it's also not cancel culture. The reason it's not cancel culture is because cancel culture has a definition. Okay, cancel culture is when a normal person, meaning you're not on a big platform, you're not you are not the spokesperson for a major brand, the CEO of a major company. You're a normal person. Okay, that's a key element. And then the other element of it is you're doing something that's totally normal, like giving a $25 donation to the Kyle Rittenhouse Fund, or you do something that's an apology level event, like saying a bad joke, or in the case of students quoting rap lyrics on TikTok. That is what cancel culture is, and it was designed to target normal people and put fear into them, and that's what the left did for the last several years. When you live in this world where you have bigger responsibilities and things like that, you have to understand that people are going to look at you different. Gilbert Gottfried tells a bad joke and loses his job at Aflac. That's not cancel culture from my perspective. Right. So I just think that we have to be more specific about this, because the left is completely trying to turn this around and play victims, and they're completely lying about what all of this is.
Yeah. And may the marketplace of dissent reign. I mean, let the marketplace of dissent reign. You cannot say free speech but, because that would turn us into the French. Right now, in history, the Rights of Man, which was written just a few years after our Constitution, was the French Revolution's response to establishing rights for the French people away from the royal elites. And they had freedom of thought and freedom of speech, but in their clause it was very different. How so? Free speech, freedom of thought, but as long as it's in the interest of society. That little line, that little clause, I'm summarizing. That little line, that little clause, free speech, but is what has 30 people being arrested in England over a social media post, all while the UK says we have freedom of speech. So we can't do free speech, but.
We should take a question from over here.
Thank you. I appreciate all you folks coming here. And just to let you know, Chanel, the first streaming service I had was OAN after FiOS and DirecTV deplatformed you, which is a story for another day.
Thank you very much.
All right. Look, we talked about tech. I'm from the tech world. It's too big and too dangerous. It's too concentrated. We may want to see something like what happened at AT&T in 1980. But getting back to the media in general, maybe the bar is too high to bring the media to account. Maybe we need to lower the bar for suing people in the media who make false statements. Maybe we need to remember the fact that there is no such thing as a shield law. What the courts have ruled that, like, a wife can't testify against the husband and a priest can't testify against the confessor. The media is not permitted to protect its sources. They can be brought before a jury. They can be put in jail unless they reveal their sources or until the file's over. Maybe, I know it's a very onerous step, but I know a lot of people on the board, on the dais, may have an issue with that, but maybe it's a step in that direction we may need to go to make the media more accountable.
Okay, I'm
And
so glad.
I'm going to add the question is, and the New York Times versus Sullivan case, where the bar is so high to sue for a public figure that I had personal experience with it. You have to prove malice, and it's very difficult to do. Although President Trump has been pretty good at doing this.
So the whole conversation, I've been thinking about this issue. There was this DC Circuit judge. Let me actually first start off by saying that I have a book coming out in April on Justice Samuel Alito, and it's looking at his jurisprudence and how it slightly differs from the other originalists. But as part of my research, I was reading this dissent by a DC Circuit judge who has since died, named Lawrence Silberman, just a giant in the field. And it was a dissent related to New York Times v. Sullivan. One of the things he pointed out was how, he had a lot of critiques of it. One of the things that I was just thinking of was that he noted that there's almost no diversity in the media these days. And if you think that there's like a diverse viewpoint from the far left viewpoint that dominates all media, it's Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Post. And what do they all have in common? Same family owner. And if you had something happen to that family, that's the end of the entire diversity of the major media. It's a very fragile situation. New York Times v. Sullivan is usually regarded as one of the bad decisions that the court needs to revisit. You saw Justice Thomas say he wants to revisit. I think Justice Alito has made a mention of wanting to revisit. In part, and Gorsuch, okay. In part because it has no basis in our common law. In fact, it used to be that you had a higher standard to meet if you were going to defame a person of renown, instead of a lower standard. There's no originalist basis for it. It has allowed corporate media to engage in all sorts of just really damaging things, including the Russia collusion hoax, which could have led to an all-out nuclear war, and in fact, you could even see it still doing that. So I don't know, I would like to shield all of my sources, but I do think that reporters should be held more accountable in their media outlets. And I do want to say there is a trick in journalism to make sure your sources aren't lying to you, which is you are allowed to take their information and not quote them. But if they lie to you, you're supposed to name them. And think about the Russia collusion hoax and how many government sources lied. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Either the media people just completely made it up, or they really had government sources who were lying to them. They should have named each and every one. If they cared at all about their integrity, they would have named each and every person who misled them into believing that false and dangerous conspiracy theory.
Well, we know they don't care about their integrity.
That is true.
Thank you.
So something that Chanel said reminded me of an idea. You said something about you hope they don't censor Mondami, Me Too, because I'm hoping it's such a failure it sets progressive socialism back for decades. But what you followed up with that 30% of Democrats feel that the assassin of Charlie Kirk was a MAGA person, had this idea when they deplatformed AON from the cable TV years ago. What is the potential viability, in your guys' opinion, of someone would have to have enough money or know enough investors to bring a business into America that was a new cable network that was just the facts, like the old Concrete days? Could that be viable? Like with AI, I did a lot of AI research for my own businesses, and I know that AI talks to AI, so another business opportunity would be AI that could recognize the tools that you're talking about. What do you guys think about those business opportunities? Do they have a chance in this country?
I mean, 60% of OANs, you can talk to professors who have studied this way before OAN was overly controversial, but 60% of our content is pure facts and news that come from the general news wires. So only towards the evening, my show, Dan Ball's show, Matt Gaetz's show, those are the opinion parts of it. I think it's economically, I don't know how economically viable it is actually, because what these networks have discovered is that opinion is way more spicy and tabloidy, and people stop the channel because they want to watch interaction and opinions and sparks. So, and drama, exactly. And Fox, I think, as every hour has an opinion show, but it's also blended in with a normal
But
news
I think one way around that, or trying to supplement that kind of thing, is the panel discussion, is a debate format, is point counterpoint, is McNeil Lehrer NewsHour, people that remember this. I think there's a role for it, but I don't know if there's a business role for it. A profitable business model for that. I think it's hard to say. I mean, the public is so divided. They really want reinforcement of what they believe.
People today, though, when they tune into to almost any network, they're not going to see that back and forth. We don't see those kinds of debates taking place anymore. a lot of reasons. One is that they're risky. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think Charlie Kirk was so successful at what he did, is he was one of the few people who was still willing to debate. Now, even if that debate was happening with college students, it was still a debate, and people like that. One thing, though, I would say about what you're saying is I do think something like that is functional as part of a whole, but it's supplementary. It's like on NFL Sunday, do you watch ESPN News? You can turn on ESPN News and you can see the ticker and it's going to tell you all the facts, but you go to Red Zone. I mean, come on. So that's kind of the way things work.
There's another issue on that's related to this, which is the fact checker business. And it's people, I don't know if you were asking, can AI be used as a fact checker? I'm not sure that was part of it.
Yes, if there are tools that can be
Yeah.
used to give us fake news, there are tools that can recognize that and say, hey guys, that's
Yeah, the problem is that human beings create AI, and I don't trust anything to be a fact checker anymore. I think we should have learned that by now.
We're going to do one more question on this side and one more question on that side. So we'll start with you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, friends. I'm going to ask you to put your headlights on and try to look down the road a little bit. We are currently in an impact wave from the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It's definitely in the moment. It's very present. You have shared where we are in media and academia. So putting on your headlights, maybe even your high beams, and looking down the roads a little bit, how do you see the wake after the wave of impact? Will it be a wake of destruction for academia? Will it be a wake of a renewal, possibly, for academia and the media? And will there be pejorative effects, or will we see an amelioration? Will this wake up America? And how far, if possible, will that come about either way?
I have Brandon Strzok, who's founder of the Walk Away movement, has been tweeting nonstop in the last week, talking about the massive explosion he has seen in moderates and Democrats who are moving, not moving so much to the right, but just walking away from the Democratic Party. And so I asked him, I said, well, you've overseen several movements at this point. You've seen Democrats walk away after the Butler shooting. You've seen Democrats walk away after some very key moments, BLM, Antifa. How is this time different? And I would share his insight because I thought it was very apt to what you're asking. He said that this time it was far more visceral. The viscerality of what has happened, the fact it was captured on camera, the movement that he is seeing away from the left, that radicalization of the left, is incrementally larger. And this time it's paired with a spiritual element too. So as dark as the last couple of weeks have felt, as heavy as it has felt, as much evil as it seems to have exposed about what the other side is capable of, I think there is hope down the road, that there is a very positive, very kind of, and I think Molly can attest to this since she was there in Phoenix to see some of that transformation. But at least from even the left, I mean, they're losing any moderates they had left as of the last 2 weeks.
I don't do strategy, so I love the question. Like, I'm going to think about it for days, but I don't. I just want to say, the one thing I'm concerned about is that I think that this assassination resonated quite heavily with normal Americans. I am not sure it resonated as much as it should have in Washington, D.C. So when you think about all the things that led to this attack on the First Amendment, and some of these are public universities. How many public universities are doing what they should be doing to ensure free and open debate and the security for the people who are engaged in that? It's next to nothing. Like, there's not government action that you're hearing about at the national level. There's not government action you're hearing about much at the state level, particularly outside of Florida. And some of these schools are quite radical. So I think that this is just like a massive event. And it kind of, for me, it felt very, and I realize like we're closer to it, but I feel like a lot of people felt this way. To me, this felt like a 9/11 style event where you see changes over the course of many years in how people are changing. But I think probably the biggest change is in the hearts of people realizing that when they didn't say anything, when left wing was being very bullying about whether you could speak freely, they've decided they're not going to do that anymore.
Just very quickly, and I don't know in terms of the staying power of this, but this poll hasn't been released yet, and it's a Democrat state, swing state. Respondents agree or disagree. Radical activists on the left are becoming dangerous, and their actions are making America more divided and less safe. 55% of independent voters agree. So I think that to back up what Molly just said, at least at this particular moment, I think a lot of people who are just normal Americans looked at the reaction to this and said, what the heck's going on? And that's something that, you know, when you have NFL stadiums across the country and you have all these other things, you know, acknowledging this thing, it creates a disconnect that I think is indicative of where things might go.
I just want to add a point about universities. Wellness event in the wake of Charlie Kirk assassination, even though it ironically was on a campus in front of students talking to him.
20?
Not one of the top 20. And the data is that they all did, almost all of them did, for 3 other recent events: the George Floyd killing and both Donald Trump elections. I mean, and I'm saying that really not to be funny. It's very sad, but the universities, and that's where the kids are educated and everything, they are not responding to, they're totally ignoring this. The day after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Stanford faculty got a campus-wide thing called Stanford Report. It wasn't even in there, wasn't even mentioned. So there are bubbles, and I think people in Florida are, in a way, in sort of a bubble. Everybody's in a different bubble. Go ahead, let's take the question.
Hi, thank you. I'm a survivor of human trafficking. I was in Epstein's circles for 15 years until I was rescued by a nonprofit organization. When President Trump got shot and went back up on the same stage a week later, it gave me the courage to start sharing my story. So I've been posting it on X since around that time. And I thought, I don't know, maybe I'm just not entertaining or something. Maybe people want to hold up the pitchforks and, you know, go after the people on the list. So, you know, I wasn't really thinking twice about not having a lot of followers or anything like that. But I kept pushing, hoping somebody would hear, somebody that could help me help others. And then I got an opportunity to do an interview with Mark Epstein. And when we did that, the interview got deleted, accounts got suspended, we fought to get them back. But after that happened, I really do question if there's free speech anywhere. My question for you is, as a survivor, do you have any suggestions on an outlet that I can reach out to try to help?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry to hear that you endured that, and I'm very pleased that as you tell your story, because of the issues that we were talking about, defamation issues, people are very nervous about getting sued if they publish something that is not able to be backed up in a court of law. An attorney will help you tell your story really well, and also work with finding the right outlet for it as well. It should be enough interest that you should be able to get maybe good legal help without having to pay a ton right now, because it's such a hot and interesting story. But I would advise you to have help to navigate through this process right now.
Thank you for that. I will say I have went down different avenues, such as legally, and some deep.
I'm sure that's true.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Here, and we very much hope that you become the next Scott Atlases and come back multiple times and visit us. Scott, thank you so much for coming and helping us put this together. But if you are passionate about free speech, if you have ideas for people who should be panelists, diverse opinions, whatever that is, please give it to us, and we will absolutely do whatever we can to put that event together. But on top of that, if you like what you're hearing, this is the first of many that we're going to have this academic year. But if you're willing to donate and you scan the QR code, we'd love to have your donations. Thank you so very much.